sister. And all these guys were trying to court her. They all had these British cars. So MGs, one Morgan, Austin Healey, Jaguars, all these British cars from the 60s, And I I didn't care what they did with my sister. They take her out on dates, leaving the car so I can drive it. I didn't mean it that way, but I mean,
don't have your sister watch this show.
I'll throw her
okay?
under the bus, not the Volkswagen bus.
Throwing your sister under the bus. Lovely.
Yeah.
And welcome, everybody. Welcome back to a new edition of the Talking About Cars podcast from the Two Tired Guys production Zoom studios, as we have a new episode coming up. And today, where everybody has a car story, we have something that's a car story, but it's also something a little parallel to the car universe. And as you can tell behind us, Bob, well, frankly, we're filling up with gas, which is not his show. It is his show, but this isn't have anything to do with his show. No, and it's not to do with the other gas, too. The episode we're talking about, by the way, I'm Randy Kerdoon. That indeed is the one, the only Hot Rod Bob Beck. In this episode, we're talking about an aspect of the collector community that is a bit rare. And while we all have, a lot of us have cars or motorcycles or trucks that we've rescued or picked up, and they're all classics. What about classic gas stations? Places in the 1920s up to the 60s and even to recent areas where stations you could go fill up at 29 cents a gallon back in the day. Back in the 70s, of course, the oil embargo, what'd that up to, Bob? Like 79 cents a gallon, and everybody freaked out.
Yeah, I remember it hitting like 50, 60 cents a gallon. And that's when I decided I can't drive a V8 car anymore. And I bought a Vega. And then I had my Morris Minor, which people would get aggravated with me because it would only take 10 gallons or 8 gallons to fill it up.
Mm-hmm.
Going, why are you putting so little gas in there? That's all it holds. I
remember actually looking at a Vega seriously, and then I looked at a AMC Gremlin. Yeah. I was looking at a Gremlin and I said, well, hell, no one's going to buy this car. There's no rear end on it. They took the trunk off. Why would anybody buy that car? And boy, was I wrong. So it's okay. So that's kind of like one of the reasons where we're kind of involved in this. And I read about a guy who is building a gas station. He bought one in his local community in upstate New York. And he is going to join us. Scott Horton will be joining us here on that. And also, when we started thinking about old gas stations and things that have been done to them, I thought about a location in Hollywood. And if you've ever been in Hollywood and you've been down Highland, and interestingly enough, my father used to be the manager of the Firestone store on Highland, which was located just south of Sunset. And so we used to go down there on weekends, and there was this gas station there, and they turned it into a Starbucks, which is interesting. But it's not just that they put it into a Starbucks. It's the way they did it. They really restored the place to gas station shine, and it was done a certain way. And our guest for that one was going to be Adrian Scott Fine. He's the incoming president of the LA Conservancy, and he has some interesting stories and some great background on that. Now, you'll see over my shoulder here, Gilmore Gasoline. And you notice where it says up here, Wilshire La Brea Service Station. And I saw that and my eyes lit up because I went, when I grew up, I actually grew up mostly in the San Fernando Valley, but my parents were from LA. And my dad grew up in Boyle Heights. My mom grew up in West LA. And so we lived right off of La Brea and I want to say Pico. And you could see, for those of you who grew up in Southern California, you may remember the Mutual of Omaha building, and it had the lights that were, it basically looked like the 40s when they had the searchlight on top. And we couldn't figure out what that was all about until somebody told us once that they put that up there because when World War II started, they were afraid of the Japanese army coming in and trying to zap Southern California, the way the whole Pearl Harbor thing came around. So they had lights going on, and it was a crazy time.
Well, you got to remember too, at that point in time, the San Fernando Valley was still a farming area. It wasn't really residential until the late 1950s. They started building houses out in that area. And I can remember when I moved out here, out to California in 1960, we lived with my uncle, and he lived in a community of 10 houses. They were surrounded by farms and ranches. And I can remember my first encounter with an electric fence, trying to pet a cow. So, those things were going on back then. You talk about people, and you and I at one point in time lived within blocks of each other. And there were still active farming and orange groves going on.
Oh yeah,
in the mid to late 60s.
Sure.
So the LA area was where everyone lived.
Topanga Plaza, which a lot of people know of from that area. When we moved out there in 1964, you're right, orange groves everywhere, south of Victory Boulevard. Nothing but orange groves. It was real interesting to live out there, and it was quite a time. But so we decided to do something a little different and talk about gas stations, and really not only the way that they can restore a little bit of architecture from that era, but also the experiences of people who grew up with those things everywhere, because gas stations were everywhere, and it seemed more than 7-Elevens at that point. So anyway, they're coming up, and we're going to talk to them as well. Adrian Scott Fine from the LA Conservancy joining us again, the incoming president. Thanks again for joining us. And of course, Scott is with us, Scott Horton, and he is actually taking it upon himself to build a garage. Scott, let's start off with you. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved first off because this is your first gas station you've done, am I right?
That's correct.
What possessed you to do this?
I guess I think probably the throwback to when I was a child. I used to ride around in a fuel truck with a friend of my father's who had a distributorship, and back in those days, he would call me up. His name was Bill, and I also called him Uncle Bill. And he said, "Hey, come on, I got to go deliver gas today. You want to ride along?" And I said, "Sure." Hop in his great big truck and fuel in the back, like a bomb going down the road.
The youngest suicide jockey in the world, I think. Yeah. Okay.
And the strangest thing was back then, I'm talking about the mid 60s. He would stop at the store and pick up a 6-pack of beer, and he would put it on. He would put it next to him, and we would go around the countryside to deliver gas. One of the gas stations that he delivered gas to is just right a mile from where I live right now. And I always had the interest. It was closed. I saw it slowly deteriorating. It was in the middle of town, it just was blight. And I said, I don't know. So years ago, the lot next to it came up for sale. I bought it at a tax auction. And then I said, geez, if somebody does something with that gas station, I can maybe, turn a buck with the lot. Well, instead, I ended up buying the gas station. So now I have the lot and the gas station, and trying to figure out what to do. But I saved it, thank God. And now, it's a strange footprint, these old gas stations. This was built in 1955. Famous architect Walter Dorwin Teague. They used to call them Teague Texacos. There were 20,000 of them all across, up and down Route 66, and obviously out your way up north. There's been several of them restored up in the northwest of the country. So anyway, I look at it, it's 40 feet wide or long, I guess 32 feet deep. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I put some of my stuff in there. I've got a speedboat. I put that in the wintertime, put it on the lake in the summertime, and put my Jeep in there in the summertime, and take the Jeep out with a plow in the wintertime up here. But it's been a real labor of love. And I, to see that come back, it was exciting to me. And I think it's a project that you have to make lots and lots of decisions on. and we'll see where it goes from there. But it's not going downhill any longer. I've painted it. I'm now working on restoring the doors because they're classic. You know, there's several classic elements about this gas station, and not just this one in particular, but all of Teague's gas stations with the corner windows and the transoms above the doors. You know, that's throwback to the 20s, right? When they used to put transoms in for ventilation, and metal windows. The garage doors, they're 350 pounds. I mean, they're huge, and they're all glass, and they're all made out of wood. Obviously, the bottom of these doors have to be redone. I'm installing a hoist right now to lift the door up because I have to take the bottom of the door off. Well, all overhead doors are lifted from the bottom. You can't unbolt those brackets without things going crazy. The springs pulling, the wires going all over, the cables going all over the place. So I'm making a makeshift door opener until I can get those bottom panels restored, bolt them back up, and then put it back the way it was. So
All right, now do you still have the pumps in front of the station?
I don't, Bob. I don't have any memorabilia at all. I don't have, you know, the air station. I don't have anything. It's a shame, but you know, you can come by that. Neighbor of mine down the street, he's got a big Texaco sign that would look just perfect over there.
Now, Adrian, of course, is involved with the LA Conservancy, and the story again, if you're just joining us, is that for a long time in Hollywood, there was a gas station similar to what's over my head here, the Gilmore station, and it was done in a certain way. I don't know if it's Art Deco or not, Adrian, but I know the style is reminiscent of the 20s and 30s, and eventually that changed hands a few times and became dilapidated, and suddenly the next thing we know, there's a Starbucks there. And when I say that, and you're looking at pictures now of it, you realize it's just not it's not your typical Starbucks. So let's go back and talk about, from your point of view, how this whole thing came to be and how you guys became aware of the gas station.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's typical of a lot of gas stations that were built across LA, across the country, and this is dates to 1935. So it's Art Deco. So it's got those kind of crisp lines, it's got speed line details. It's a very cute little building in terms of when it was built. And there were, you know, thousands of these buildings, and then one by one, they disappeared as redevelopment happens in a place like Los Angeles, highly valuable real estate. And miraculously, this building survived until the early 90s. And that's when there was concern about its future. And there was an effort to have it designated as a local landmark, or in LA, it's called a historic cultural monument. So that's really the reason that the building survived. So it was designated in 1992. And from then until around 2013, it just sat there. A truck hit it. It just was like falling apart. And eventually, there was a plan that came forward, including with Starbucks, that said, we want to rehabilitate this building. We'll keep it as it is. We'll make it work as a drive-through and a walk-up Starbucks. And then there was a whole effort to figure out how to do that, how to put the building back together. It had suffered a lot of deterioration over the years. And so essentially, that's what happened around 2015, 2016, and reopened. And it's been a success ever since. And it's one of those beloved little buildings that, you know, people have been driving by for years, if not decades, and thought about. And now it's a place where you can actually get a cup of coffee or a bagel or whatever. And yeah, it's a great reuse in terms of a very purpose-built kind of typical California auto culture kind of structure.
Dare I say it's possibly, for those coffee drinkers who go through there, a destination to possibly, hey, I went through the gas station Starbucks, I mean, that kind of thing.
I think so. If you go by almost any time, there's a long line. And of course, that's kind of ubiquitous with Starbucks, but it is an experience to actually go to this Starbucks because it's very different from any other. Even the branding for Starbucks was kind of toned down and to fit the character of this gas station. So there was a former Texaco sign out front when this, I think, turned into a Texaco station in the mid 50s. And so Starbucks repurposed that sign. So it was very carefully kind of put back together with the new use, but in a way that would still honor kind of this is a 1930s Art Deco gas station.
You know, we were talking about that before you came on, and I was trying to remember where it was, and I was confused with it. But I remember in 1990, I went to work for an equipment company called About Automotive, and that was still an operational gas station. I put a smog machine in that store, and then all of a sudden, a year later or so, it's now serving coffee and things like that. But it was a different group turned it into that, and it was kind of strange to see that happen. But I thought it was cool that they left the building and kept the building going. And now I haven't been in the LA area in a long time, but it's great to hear that they've refurbished it and they keep the history alive there. That it was just so iconic in that area.
Yeah, and it kind of speaks to the work that we do at the Conservancy and with buildings like this is that they're incredibly adaptable for new uses. Even a very tiny little 1930s gas station can take on and come up with a new life. And this was like the perfect kind of win-win in terms of Starbucks reusing this, because that's why it's set for decades in terms of like, what do you do with this building? Everyone said it's important and it should be kept, but sometimes you have to wait until the right use comes along. And over the years, this was a place where photo shoots and filming happen all the time because it is that little time capsule of what LA used to be in the 1930s. So I think it was featured in LA Story, the movie, and these fashion shoots because it is this little tiny little icon in terms of kind of LA car culture and architecture.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now history behind us, we've got two Gilmore stations, which were pretty popular here in Southern California. They weren't really a brand known outside California. They had a very strong racing history, and they tied that into the gasoline and even a racetrack that was there on right off Fairfax, if I remember correctly. And for those of you who don't know Fairfax, it's where CBS is right now.
Right.
Uh,
Well, they had a baseball stadium there too. I think it was called Gilmore Stadium, where
yeah, and then right
the
alongside
Hollywood Stars used to be.
Yeah, and then Pan Pacific Auditorium was right there too.
Right.
And I can remember the first car show I went to in 1960 was right there. And, you know, just the Art Deco style of that building itself was memorable. And just all the California culture, like you're talking about, these old gas stations were there. They were in operation through the 60s because no one thought about making a gas station look any different than utilitarian fresh steel buildings. But they were cool. And Scott, you talked about parking your Jeep in your gas station and taking it out with a plow. I can remember growing up in the East that's exactly what people did with Jeeps. Put a plow in front of them. And in the wintertime, they'd plow the gas stations and other areas around it that they could with the little Jeeps. That, you know, the retired, I guess you could say, military Jeeps, because there wasn't really a consumer Jeep that was that popular back then.
Yeah, my Jeep's it's a Wrangler, and that's all I use it for. Although the insurance company still thinks I ought to pay the full boat, but
yeah, but what do they know? What do they know?
Yeah, what year is it, Scott?
It's 2008.
Oh,
so
yeah, way too new.
Way too new. Way too new.
Yeah. Adrian, are there any more gas stations that you're aware of this era that are being refurbished or people are trying to save?
Yeah, I mean, there's great ones that exist all over the country. And fortunately, some have been preserved and reused for different uses. There's another one in Los Angeles in Eagle Rock that's even earlier than this one from the 1920s. It was just recently designated as a local landmark and somehow is managed to survive almost entirely intact. And so there was definitely some development pressure that threatened that prompted the community to kind of figure out to get it designated. And now there's still, you know, work that needs to be put in place to figure out its reuse. There's a great 1930s gas station, Northern California in Truckee, downtown Truckee, that's a real estate office. So, you know, all these buildings can take on new uses and people love going to them. There's a lot that have been turned into restaurants. So, you know, it's just fun to go to an old gas station and you just get a sense of like what the experience was in the 30s or 40s or 50s, like Scott's, to see kind of how the evolution of car service and gas operation happened, because it happened really quickly in terms of like what you started with was these really tiny little buildings, and then they grew into, as Scott was saying, multiple bays in terms of full service operations to what we have today, which are these kind of monolithic, massive canopies. But there was a thought and process in terms of the evolution. But yeah, there's lots of them that fortunately still exist. But there used to be thousands of these buildings. They were prefab, they were easily, built quickly, and they were serving the need as car, culture was coming online, from earliest cars to the growth of just the idea of like highways and expansion in town, especially a place like Los Angeles. So there used to be a lot of these, and now we have a handful. So we try to keep them when we can.
Over the years, though, and Bob, you can chime in on this, of course, is there were so many different brands in Southern California, especially growing up. I mean, they had the usual ones. You had Chevron, you had you had 76, you had all the other ones. Signal, remember Signal?
Remember Signals? Yes.
There was Signal Gas. There was Atlantic Richfield, which we now know as Arco, before Arco went the discount route and started doing other things. There were so many different ones, and it was just interesting to see how once upon a time, when they were 11.9 cents per gallon, suddenly it all started panning out to the point where now you sometimes have to go many blocks to find a gas station, whether it be in the West Valley or the East Valley or Los Angeles proper or anywhere really. And this is not just an LA, California kind of issue. This happens just about anywhere where our listeners are, because there was a gas station, I'm sure, that has closed down, and it's gone from so many to just relatively few.
Well, I remember the unveiling of Chevron. It used to be Standard, and then you had another brand that was Chevron, and then they merged or something. And I remember that they covered the signs up and the big announcement, and then all of a sudden now it's Chevron. I remember the Flying A became Mobile. Here, like we were talking about Signal, we had Signal stations. We had all sorts of gas stations, and like you're saying, one on every corner. As a kid, I worked at an Esso station.
Esso.
Esso. And it became
Exxon.
Arco, not Exxon. It became Exxon.
Yeah, E-double-cross-O-N. Ooh, did I just say that aloud?
Ooh, yeah, you did. But, 16 years old, no one filled their own tank. We all came out. We stood at the pumps. We waited for a car to come in, and we filled the tank. We washed the window. We checked the oil. We checked the air while the tank was filling. And, you got to the point where you were like a pit crew, and you could do this before the nozzle clicked off. But you don't have that anymore. Although I was in New Jersey Thanksgiving weekend, seeing some family. I can't pump gas back there. It's illegal for someone to get out of their car and pump gas.
Oh, same thing in Oregon.
It was.
Up until
Oregon
recently.
changed.
Up until recently. Yeah.
Oregon changed, but New Jersey has it. So there's a guy, now it's 40 degrees outside. To me, that's cold. I'm used to California. But there's a guy standing there waiting for cars to pull in. And he's got a little box that he stood in that I guess had a heater in it. And when you pulled in, he came up to the window. What do you want? And filled the tank. You couldn't get out of your car to do this. And it feels so foreign now. Whereas when we were kids, you did not get out of your car. If you were pumping your own gas, the guy stood there and watched you. Like, you're going to steal the gas.
Well, it's sort of interesting. I want to dovetail into that a little bit, Bob. My community is only 1,200 people in the wintertime. It goes up to 4,000. We live in a recreational kind of community. We used to have 5 gasoline stations in this little town. Now there's only one operating. But they were social areas. People would gather at the gas station and just talk. I don't know when they ever got any work done, because people would come by, and, maybe they'd get gas, maybe they'd just pull in and talk to everybody that was getting gas. And then they just hang around and talk to the proprietor.
Adrian, we were talking a little about gas stations and similar situations elsewhere that you guys are dealing with the Conservancy. What other kind of buildings do you find kind of in that category where they've been around for a long time and they're kind of using you guys to help repurpose it into something as opposed to tearing down really what a lot of people think is really great architecture in Southern California?
There's a range of things. I mean, there's a lot of purpose-built buildings that are more challenging than to figure out how do you reuse them or they take on a new life. So like historic theaters, there used to be tons of like neighborhood theaters all across, our communities. And so one by one, those have disappeared. So we're often working to figure out how do we repurpose an old theater. So sometimes they've taken on a new use, like downtown Los Angeles has an old theater that's now an Apple store. And they did an amazing job. And you can still tell it's a theater, but now it's Apple. So, and sometimes there's another one that's turned into Urban Outfitters, a former theater. But a lot of what we're dealing with right now is office buildings. It's just all this kind of the same issue like that happened with gas stations. Times change, needs change. So a lot of office buildings are sitting vacant because people are working from home. They don't need to go in the office. They don't need that space. So there's a lot of conversation about, well, how do you convert that space maybe to residential now? So it's all about this, as our communities are constantly changing, these buildings, we've got to figure out how do we ensure that they're reused and they're relevant to the needs that we're facing now. And it's interesting, you're talking about like gas stations, there used to be a ton of them, and they were all built on highly visible and now highly profitable real estate. And so they have been redeveloped for a higher and better use. And sometimes it's much bigger, taller, more density, and sometimes it's mixed use housing developments, that kind of thing, that replace these smaller gas stations. But that's what we're seeing all the time is constant change. And we always have to keep up with, okay, how do we keep reusing the existing buildings? Because it's a lot more economical and better for our climate and environment to reuse these places rather than keep demolishing and rebuilding.
With the push by our state government to increase density or population density, that's got to be a bigger challenge for you because they really want you to tear them down and build up multi-use or multi-family dwellings.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not against density, and that's how a lot of cities need to change. Certainly, a place like LA, where we have a lot of like commercial strips that have a lot of one-story buildings, it probably makes sense that you have higher density that can serve the population better. So we're always trying to figure out, okay, how do we keep some of the old, incorporate it with the new? And there's usually ways to do that, especially if you've got people that are willing to have a conversation and think creatively. And that's, in many ways, that's the whole story with the Starbucks on Highland is, Starbucks came there and said, okay, we want to do this, but we don't want to do it in a way that destroys the building. So, and usually there's a way to figure that out. It's just, having people having open a mind and being willing to have a conversation and think about what's an alternative to doing this in a different way.
So there we go. Gentlemen, we appreciate you being on the show. And again, talking a little bit about what's going on. Adrian, and people want more information about the LA Conservancy and want to support what you guys are doing. What do they do?
Please go to our website, laconservancy.org, become a member, contact us, get involved. There's lots of different ways, but we'd love to have you included. It's interesting, Randy, when you said earlier about connection, with cars and people, it's exactly what we say about historic buildings is it's about the people that old buildings help connect us to and the stories and with that. And it's the same kind of thing. These kind of places, whether it's a car or an old building, sometimes it's both in this case, it really transcends and allows us to kind of understand people before us, but also where we're at and where we're going. So that's what we're all about. But appreciate the shout out and please reach out and we have to get involved.
Thank you for joining us. You bring that up, and of course, when I talk about the connection with vehicles, it's not necessarily about all family. I mean, sometimes there's just a car that makes you drop your jaw and go gaga and the whole thing. And I don't mean Lady Gaga. I'm talking about, when you see something like I have a 57 and I've talked about it, Safari Wagon, which is basically a Chevy Nomad, but it's the rare Pontiac version. And I was all ready to get a Chevy Nomad until I saw the Pontiac and went, oh, to hell with this. I don't want that. I want one of those because you can't find those anywhere. And other things like something about the 57 DeSoto, aside from the fact that whales are smaller, there's something about it that just makes me go, wow, I need to get one of those. And I need to get one with the single headlights, not the double headlights. So it's something innate, and you know about it. And that's why a lot of us get into the whole collecting thing. Scott, thanks for joining us. And again, follow us on social media, everybody. We're on Twitter, Facebook. Oh, we don't call it Twitter anymore. That X thing for now. And also Instagram. Again, thanks to Adrian Scott Fine from the LA Conservancy, Scott Horton from his place in New York. Continued success on your situation. Until next week, that's Bob and Adrian in California. That's Scott in New York State. I'm Randy at the Two Tired Guys Studios right here in Washington State, having fun talking about cars. So have a good time. Happy New Year, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.